Tina introduced read-only tokens recently, and this allows you to use SSG and fallback blocking together. If you haven't used fallback blocking before, it uses server-side rendering to retrieve content and serve it to the user even when the page has not been built. This comes with a few issues that you may run into, such as you no longer have a fallback page or a 404 page by default, and any navigation to a page that does not exist will serve a user a blank page or a loading page if you're using no data. You also need a way to handle when there is data, when there is no data, and of course when there's no page. With the introduction of read-only tokens, we can tackle this with a lot less friction and a much better user and developer experience. So to begin with our project here, we're going to create a new Tina application using the create Tina app using npx. You can do npx create Tina app at latest, and then we'll do a name for it. So we'll just say SSG Fallback example. Then it's going to ask us some questions. I'm going to use a yarn, and we're going to use this bare bones starter. It doesn't really have any styling or anything like that, but this video is more about the implementation. Talking about the implementation, there are a few things you need to know before you start using read-only tokens. First of all, you need to make sure the data layer is set up on the application that you want to use this with. Secondly, you also need to set up read-only tokens. Now, both of these things are going to be handled in this video, but I want to make sure you understand that both of those are a requirement to use this. The first thing you want to do is enable the data layer, and to do that, you need to set this from next start to have experimental data. So at the end of next start, you can do -- experimental data and hit save, and now this is technically enabled. It won't start working until you actually commit this to GitHub. So first of all, let's just look at the project as a whole. So let's do yarn dev and bring up the project so we can look and talk about how this is all going to work. So here is our base project. It doesn't really have anything going on. It has a home and a posts. When you click posts, there's a single post here, and this is the data that is delivered. So what we're going to do now is we're going to commit this to GitHub, and then we're going to go to Tina and add this as a project. And then we can talk about how you add read-only tokens to the project. Welcome to the Tina dashboard. Here we're going to click new project, and we're going to say import your site. We're going to authenticate with GitHub, and then we're going to pick the project that we're using. So for my example, I called the repository SSG example right here. So I'm going to select that project. Right now, the only URL we have is 3000. So go ahead, click create project, and now we have everything we need. So to enable read-only tokens, you're going to go to this token section here, and you're going to click new token on the right-hand side. Give the token a name. So I'm just going to say SSG example. And then any branches that you want to be able to use this on. So maybe you have a development branch and a main branch, or maybe you just have main as your branch. Go ahead and create the token. When you click this create token, it's going to give you a token on screen. You're going to use that token in our project. So I'm going to click create token here, and here it is in our project. Now you probably don't want to expose this token, although it is a read-only token. It's just safer to keep this away from prying eyes. So go ahead, use this as a API key or something similar. Make sure you click it to copy it to your clipboard. And now we can talk about the next part. The next part of our project is to actually deploy it, because we need this deployed to actually use read-only tokens and the data layer. So here is my example. I'm going to import that, and I'm going to add an environmental variable here, and it's going to be next _ public _ Tina _ client _ ID. And we're going to paste in from our overview here the client ID. And then we're going to hit deploy and allow that to deploy out to Vercel. Once it's done, we can talk about what we need to do next. So our project is now deployed. So we need to go to the dashboard and we need to grab this domain here from Vercel. So you can just click that, copy the domain and go back to Tina Cloud and click configuration and add it in here. And this is our example that we're going to be using to allow this all to work. So go ahead and hit save. Now this part is all set up. We now have a deployed example that works with just SSG out of the box, but doesn't have the read-only tokens. So if we actually look at this example, and go to /admin, and then we edit with Tina, and we continue with Tina, and we go to our blog posts here. If we create a new page and we say test, and we give it a title and hit save, while that's being created here, it's loading the data and we see it here. But if we click on this, you'll find that the content isn't actually available. You'll get a 500 error, and that's not what we really want. Because this is unavailable, we need to actually handle all of this. So what we're going to do now is implement the SSG with fallback correctly so that it's handled in a way that the user will get a good experience. So we're back in the application and I've gone to the slug.js, which is under the posts folder. And this is where we're going to be doing all of our work. This is where we want to handle that experience. We want anybody to come to our blog and be able to create a new page and then also be able to edit that page immediately. So there isn't much to do with this query. This query is actually going to stay the same, as well as this props page here. All of the work that we're going to be doing is in here. And as you can see, we have fallback blocking enabled on this, but it doesn't help if the page is not available and ready to be used. So we're going to make all of our changes in here to allow this to work as expected. So the first thing we're going to do is set the let data to just the variable name, and we're not going to initialize it as an object. We're also going to create another variable here called error, and that's going to handle if we don't have any data. Now remember, there are 3 different ways this can work. 1, the data is available and we serve it up at build time. 2, the data is available, but we've used SSR to retrieve it because we've just created a new page and the build hasn't completed. Or 3, the page is not available, it has not been created, and we should return a 404. So this would handle a experience where the data is available and we can return the props. So that would be, let's say, at build time. The next variation is that we need to say if there is no data. So we can say if no data, and we can just return the error back to true. So now we're saying there is an error. So now we have error is true, we can actually handle this. We can say if there is an error, so if there's an error, we want to actually make a request to our content API and retrieve the data if it's available. So we can do const res equals fetch, and then the fetch request is going to be from the content URL here, and the branch will be whichever branch you want. So I'm just going to set this to main. Now this is the same as what's in the schema.ts. It's right here as the API URL, and this is what we're going to be using to drive where the content is coming from. So now we have that. We want to be able to do a comma here, and then we need to do our method. So inside of here, we can do method, and we'll do post, and then underneath that, we need the body. So the body will be our JSON.stringify, and then we're going to pass in the query and the variables that we're using. And then finally, we need the headers, and this is where our read-only token is going to come in. So we're going to do an X API key, so X API key, and we're going to set that to process.env.tina read only token. Then we need the content type as well. So we do content dash type, and we'll set that equal to application/JSON. So now we have the 2 different headers. We have the headers for the API key and the kind of content that we want. Then, based upon this fetch request, we're going to set this to const JSON data equals await res.json, and then data equals JSON data.data. So now we have this piece here. Let's just talk about it before we move on. What's happening here is we're telling the content API, hey, if there is no data, then there is an error on our side. Now, this could be that it's not been built, so we should go out and try and retrieve the data. So we then make a request to our content API that holds all of the data in the data layer. We say, use our read-only token and see if this data actually exists. Maybe it was just created 2 seconds ago. So the content API will then respond with some data. At that point, we can then check to see if the data is available. So we can do one more check and say, if there's no data, we can then return what is called not found true. So what not found true means is, if that happens, we can actually just return a 404 page, and it will just return the default fallback 404 page. And this means that even with fallback blocking, we will get a 404 no matter what if the page doesn't exist. So we can write, if there's no data, not found, and set it to true. And then we just need to make sure that we return that. So inside of that, we can do return and close that out and hit save. So at this point, we have a fully working option that works using fallback blocking. So let's just cover this code one more time. So we're saying there's a data and a variable called error. We're going to try and retrieve the data using our static requests at build time. If that fails, we want to go ahead and say, if there's no data, set the error to true. If the error is true, we want to make a request using read-only tokens to our content API. If the data is then available through the content API, we're going to go ahead and return that to the user. If not, we're going to say it's not found and return a 404 page. And that handles all of those different scenarios I talked about in the middle. We've got 1, the data is available because it was already built. 2, the data was not available at build time, but it is available now, so return the data again. And 3, there's no data available because this page doesn't actually exist. So it's ready to go. So what we need to do now is actually deploy these changes out. So we're going to deploy these changes, and then I'll show you how it works when you're using a deployed site. So one thing we need to do is update our Vercel integration. So go ahead and go under project settings, click environment variables, and then paste in your read-only token, and then give it a name. If you've forgotten what the name was, it was Tina_read_only_token, and it should look like this. And then just go ahead and click add there. Then once everything's deployed, we can test this out and make sure it works correctly. So we're back in our code now. So let's go ahead and try and create a new project here. We'll call this one testing 2. We'll give it a title of test 2 and a blog post of Tina is awesome. When we click save here, the document will get created and the build process will start. But because we're using the data layer and we're also using read-only tokens, if I click this button here, it will actually retrieve that data from our data, and you can see it's being loaded in right now. So now we have a better experience here. So now the user can go ahead and start editing and change all their content, hit save and allow that to all build out, and they'll get a great experience. So now let's talk about if we go to a page that doesn't exist. For example, I just put something junk in the URL, and you can now see 404 page not found, the exact example we need. We've now got a way to build the project as is, then also retrieve data using SSR from fallback blocking. And then finally, if there's no page that never existed in our content, we'll go ahead and display a 404.